God, she walks so slowly. By the time she gets from the kitchen to the living room, you could grow old. The words didn't hit me. They seeped through the wall, like a draft through an old window frame, and settled deep in my chest as a profound cold. I froze in the middle of the hallway. The weight of the tray with the lemonade suddenly felt unbearable, and the clinking of the ice cubes in the pitcher became the only sound in the world. It was the voice of Claire, my daughter-in-law. Sharp, impatient, as always. And then I heard something else. A quiet, stifled chuckle. My son's laugh. Leo's. And that sound, barely audible, shattered something inside of me, something old, patient, and very strong, something I thought could never be broken. It was Sunday, around 3 p.m. The sun was flooding the veranda where they sat, waiting for the cool drink I was bringing them. My hands, which had spent a lifetime holding tools, needles, children's foreheads, and heavy trays, betrayed me with a tremor. I saw the pitcher tilt, the yellow liquid with its sprigs of mint nearly spilling onto the old rug. Professional habit took over. Slowly, controlling every muscle, every nerve, I lowered the tray to the floor. I bent at the waist, feeling the familiar dull ache, and placed it down carefully, without a sound. Then I straightened up. I could hear their voices from the veranda. They had already moved on to another topic, having forgotten about me, about my slowness, about my existence beyond the function of fetch and carry. I didn't go to them. I turned around, and just as slowly as I had walked toward them, I headed to my room. Each step echoed in the silence of the empty hallway. They were the first steps on a path I didn't yet comprehend. After they left, leaving behind cookie crumbs on the table and the faint scent of Claire's perfume in the air, I sat in the silence for a long time. The house, which had always felt cozy, suddenly seemed vast and hollow. I went to the kitchen, looked at the 2 dirty cups they had left in the sink, and for the first time in years, I felt not the urge to clean, but a cold detachment. I took my favorite old cup, the one with the barely noticeable crack near the handle, spooned in some tea, and poured the boiling water. This simple ritual making tea just for myself felt like something new, almost forbidden. I sat at the table, wrapping my palms around the hot cup, and let the memories surface. The first to arrive was the memory of the money. It was 2018, a gray autumn evening. We were sitting at this very kitchen table. Leo had just lost his job, and the bank was threatening to take their house. I saw how his hands trembled, how he couldn't meet my eyes. Claire sat beside him, her face a mask of irritation and fear. "Mom, it's temporary." Leo said, "We'll pay you back as soon as I'm back on my feet." He spoke of the mortgage, of interest rates, of the possibility they could end up on the street. I remember looking at my son, a grown man, and seeing the same little boy who used to cry over a scraped knee. And I did what I had always done. I fixed his pain. The next day, I went to the bank and withdrew $65,000, almost everything I had from the sale of my share of my parents' home. The money I had been saving for a rainy day, for my own old age, I gave it to him, feeling not regret, but relief, because his pain was my pain, or so I thought at the time. That memory gave way to another, older and heavier, a memory not of money, but of time and strength. I remembered the final years of my husband's parents, how I cared for his father, who was bedridden. I remember the smell of medicine in the room, the weight of his body as I turned him to prevent bed sores. I remember the silent gratitude in his eyes when I brought him broth, or just sat beside him and read the newspaper. I gave them my energy, my health, my sleep. I did it because it was my duty, because it was the right thing to do. My body, now an object of ridicule, had for years been an instrument of care. It had served others, asking for nothing in return. I never thought of it as a sacrifice. It was simply life. But the worst part was his laugh. Not Claire's words, but his quiet laugh. It was the sound with which he erased everything, the $65,000, the sleepless nights by his grandfather's bed, every bowl of soup I brought him when he was sick. With that one laugh, it was as if he said, "None of that matters. Your love, your care, your sacrifices, they are all nothing compared to how funny it is to watch you move your feet." I felt as if my own body had betrayed me, becoming a source of mockery for the person I held dearest. They looked at me and saw only an obstacle to be navigated, a slow, irritating obstacle. I finished my tea. It was cold, bitter. I stood up and walked to the bedroom. There, in my husband's old wooden chest, I kept all the important papers. The air in the room was still, smelling of lavender and old books. I opened the chest. My fingers, no longer trembling, moved methodically through the folders. Here was the deed of sale for the house. Here was the bank statement from 2018, showing the large withdrawal. And here the most important one, the documents for the trust fund, worth $450,000 that my husband had set up for me, with Leo listed as the sole beneficiary after my death. I took out the papers and laid them on the desk. I picked up my phone. I found the number in my contacts, the notary, an old family friend. I pressed the call button. "Good morning, Mr. Gable. This is Martha, Michael's wife. I'm sorry to bother you. I'd like to schedule a consultation. Yes, as soon as possible. I'm interested in updating my will and medical power of attorney." His voice was calm and professional. We arranged a meeting for Tuesday. After hanging up, I walked to the nightstand by my bed. A silver-framed photograph stood there, Leo and Claire on their wedding day. They were laughing, happy, young. I looked at them for a long moment. Then I picked up the frame and, without rushing, turned it to face the wall. They laughed at my slowness. They simply didn't know I was walking toward a goal, not running away from old age. The next morning, Monday, I woke up long before my alarm. I didn't hurry. I brewed myself coffee, sat down at the kitchen table where I had once signed away my future, and placed my phone and an old notebook in front of me. At exactly 9:15, I began to dial the number for the local fitness center. The office of Mr. Gable smelled of old leather, paper, and quiet deliberation. It was a scent I associated with my husband, Michael, a scent of permanence and order. The room was paneled in dark wood, the only sound the soft ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. It was Tuesday morning, and the world outside the thick windows felt distant. This place was a sanctuary of logic, a stark contrast to the emotional chaos that had churned inside me just 2 days prior. I sat opposite him, my back straight, my hands resting calmly on my handbag. He was a kind man with gentle eyes, a man who had handled our family's affairs for 30 years. "Martha," he began softly, looking at me over his spectacles. "You said you wished to make some updates. A standard review is always wise." "It's more than a review, Mr. Gable," I said, my voice steady. My heart was not racing. My palms were not sweating. I felt a clarity I hadn't known in years. "I want to amend my will and medical power of attorney, and I need to change the designated beneficiary of my husband's trust fund." He paused, his pen hovering over a yellow legal pad. He met my gaze, searching for something hesitation perhaps, or distress. He found neither. "I see," he said slowly. "And the beneficiary, you wish to change it from Leo?" I simply nodded. "Yes, I want him removed." It wasn't revenge. It was a repair. I was fixing a fundamental flaw in the structure of my life, a support beam I had mistakenly believed was sound, but had proven to be rotten. The following week unfolded like a checklist. Each day had a purpose, a single, methodical task designed to reclaim a piece of my independence. On Wednesday, I walked into the main branch of my bank. The air was cool and sterile, smelling of clean floors and circulated air, the opposite of Mr. Gable's warm, wooden office. I sat with a young woman whose name tag read Sandra. I explained that I wanted to open a new high-yield savings account. I transferred $5,000 into it from my main account, watching the numbers shift on her screen. "I'd like to call this the Independence Fund," I told her, and she smiled politely and typed it in. Then came the harder part. "I also need to review all my existing accounts for authorized users." As she typed, a sudden, vivid memory surfaced, a stark contrast to the cold efficiency of the bank. I saw Leo as a little boy, standing on a stool in our kitchen, carefully dropping coins into his first piggy bank. I remembered the feel of his small hand in mine, guiding him. "This is for your future, sweetie," I'd told him. The memory didn't bring tears. It brought a quiet, aching confirmation. I had been building his future my entire life. He had never learned to build his own. Sandra looked up. "Yes, Mrs. Daniels. Your son, Leo Daniels, is listed as a co-signer on your primary checking account, with rights of survivorship." My voice was even. "Please revoke his access immediately." That afternoon, I called a locksmith. A young man arrived with a heavy toolbox and a quiet, professional demeanor. As he worked on the front door, the sound of the drill, removing the old lock cylinder, echoed through the house. It was a harsh, grating sound, but to me, it was the sound of security being restored. I stood in the garden, pulling weeds from my rose bushes, my hands covered in soil. Each weed I pulled felt like a small, satisfying victory over neglect. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Leo. I ignored it. It buzzed again a few minutes later. "Claire." I let it ring. The locksmith finished and handed me a set of 3 new, shiny keys. They felt solid and real in my palm. "All set, ma'am," he said. "No one's getting in without one of these." I paid him, and as he drove away, the silence that settled over the house was no longer one of emptiness, but of peace. Later that evening, I saw the blinking light on my answering machine. I pressed the button and listened as I wiped down the kitchen counters. Leo's voice filled the room, strained with a forced casualness. "Hey, Mom, just calling to check in. We, we drove by earlier, and I tried to use my key to drop off some groceries, but it didn't work. Must be sticking. Anyway, give me a call back. Hope you're okay." A short pause, then Claire's sharp whisper in the background. "Ask her why she didn't answer." Then a click. I stopped wiping the counter. I replayed the message in my head. He wasn't worried about me. He was alarmed that his access had been denied. The groceries were a pretext. They hadn't come to check on me. They had come to check on their investment. It was a cold, clarifying thought. The next few days were dedicated to the symbolic repairs. I took out the old wooden chest filled with family documents. I found Leo's birth certificate, his first report card, a lock of his baby hair. I didn't throw them away. I placed them all neatly into a large manila envelope. On the front, in my clearest handwriting, I wrote, "Leo, history." I did the same with the wedding photos, the holiday cards, the remnants of a life that was no longer mine. I wasn't erasing my past. I was archiving it. I was separating it from my present. Then, I took out the new documents from Mr. Gable, the updated will, the new medical power of attorney naming my sister as my agent. I read them once more, then signed them with the steady hand of a nurse who knows exactly where to place the needle. In the bottom of the chest, I found an old travel brochure for the coastal towns of Italy, a trip Michael and I had always planned but never took. First, the children were too young. Then his parents grew ill. Then Leo needed the money. There was always a reason. I smoothed out the creased paper, looking at the faded picture of a small village clinging to a cliff above a turquoise sea. I didn't pack a bag or buy a ticket. Not yet. I simply took the brochure and placed it on my nightstand, where the photo of Leo and Claire used to be. It was a promise. On Saturday, after a week of methodical, quiet work, I walked downtown. The sun was warm on my face. I passed the bank, the lawyer's office, the hardware store where I'd ordered the new deadbolt. They were no longer places of anxiety, but milestones on my new map. I stopped in front of a small French bakery I hadn't visited in years. The smell of butter and sugar was intoxicating. I went inside and bought a single, perfect lemon tart. I didn't take it home. I walked to a nearby park, sat on a bench under a large oak tree, and ate it slowly, savoring every bite. For the first time in as long as I could remember, the only person I needed to please was myself, and the taste was exquisitely sweet. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway was different now. It was no longer the familiar rumble of my son's SUV, a sound that once signaled the happy interruption of a quiet afternoon. Now it was an intrusion. I was sitting in the living room, a book resting unread in my lap, listening to the soft whisper of rain against the window pane. I heard the car door slam, then footsteps on the porch, quick and impatient. A key scraped against the new lock, a futile, metallic sound of denial. A pause. Then the knocking began. "Mom, are you in there?" Leo's voice was muffled by the thick oak door. It was tight with confusion, not concern. "The key isn't working." "Mom?" I didn't move. I took a slow sip of my tea, the warmth of the mug a small, solid comfort in my hands. The knocking grew louder, more insistent. "Mom, open the door. What is going on? We're getting soaked out here." So Claire was with him. I pictured them on the porch, huddled under the small overhang, their modern lives momentarily thwarted by an old woman's new boundary. He rattled the doorknob, a frustrated, angry sound. I closed my eyes and listened, not to him, but to the rain. My mother used to say, "When people refuse to hear your words, let them listen to your silence. It has a voice all its own." After another minute of unanswered knocking, I heard his frustrated sigh, then their footsteps retreating, and finally, the sound of his car speeding away. The silence they left behind was profound and absolute. It was mine. That silence invited me to walk. I rose from my chair and began a slow tour of the house, a final inventory of the life I had built within these walls. It was a walk through a palace of memory, each room a gallery, each object an exhibit. I stopped first at the old, overstuffed armchair in the corner of the living room. My fingers traced the worn pattern on the armrest. I remembered Leo, barely 7 years old, curled up in that very chair, burning with a fever. I had spent the entire night beside him, bathing his forehead with a cool cloth, his small, trusting hand clutching my finger. The memory was so warm, so pure, it was almost painful. Then, a colder memory surfaced, sharp as glass. Leo and Claire, visiting just a few months ago. He was slumped in this same chair, his face illuminated by the blue glow of his phone, completely oblivious as I tried to tell him about my garden. And Claire, glancing at the chair with disdain, had said, "You should really get rid of this thing, Leo. It makes the whole room look so dated." The chair hadn't changed, but the boy within the man had vanished. I moved into the kitchen, the heart of the home. I ran my hand over the smooth, worn surface of the oak table. I could almost smell the ghosts of 1,000 meals, birthday cakes and Thanksgiving turkeys, the simple comfort of soup on a winter's day. I remembered Michael sitting at the head of the table, his laughter filling the room. It was a good life, but then the warm memory was chilled by another. I saw myself sitting right here, placing the bank check for $65,000 on this very table. The stark, official paper looked alien on the warm wood. I remembered Leo's promises, his talk of the mortgage, his solemn vow that this was just a loan. The table had borne witness to my greatest acts of love and my deepest acts of foolishness. My walk took me to the hallway, to the doorframe leading to the bedrooms. There, faint but still visible, were the pencil marks tracking Leo's height. From a small boy who barely reached my waist to a lanky teenager who towered over me, each line was a moment of pride, a physical testament to the love and care I had poured into his growth. I touched the highest mark, a small dash with the date of his 18th birthday next to it. Then my eyes drifted downwards, to the spot on the floorboards right in front of me. This was where I had stood. This was the exact spot where I had frozen, tray in hand, when Claire's words and his laugh had drifted down the hall and fractured my world. The memory was no longer just in my mind. It felt embedded in the wood itself, a cold spot in the heart of my home. After my tour, I returned to the kitchen table. The rain had softened to a drizzle, and a pale afternoon light filtered through the window. I took out a simple notebook and a pen. I had walked through my past, acknowledged its warmth and its pain. Now it was time to choose my future. I drew a line down the center of the page. At the top of one column, I wrote, "To keep." In the other, "To leave." The list was surprisingly short. To keep: my mother's jewelry, Michael's books, my gardening tools, the photo albums from before the wedding. To leave: the heavy furniture, the endless sets of dishes, the suffocating weight of expectation. I was not just decluttering a house, I was decluttering my soul. The next day, I began to pack. It was a methodical, unhurried process. I wasn't fleeing. I was preparing for a planned departure. I started with the most important things. In my bedroom, I pulled a sturdy box from the closet. First, I took out my old orthopedic shoes, the Dr. Comfort pair Claire had so subtly mocked. They were symbols of my infirmity, yes, but also of my endurance. I had walked countless miles in them, caring for others. I wiped them clean with a soft cloth, a gesture of respect for the woman I had been, and wrapped them carefully in tissue paper before placing them in the box. Then I took out the new running shoes, the bright Hoka pair I'd bought after my first month of aqua aerobics. I did not wrap them. I did not box them. I placed them by the door, ready for the journey ahead. The last thing I packed in that box was the travel brochure for Italy. I placed it right on top of the wrapped shoes. With a black marker, I sealed the box and wrote on the side in clear, steady letters, "The path taken." When the last box was taped shut, I looked around the room. The spaces where furniture used to be were now just patches of clean floor. The walls, bare of pictures, seemed taller. The house no longer felt empty. It felt clean, ready for new stories, stories that would be written by someone else. The days that followed were filled with a quiet, purposeful hum. My life, once a sprawling estate of obligations to others, was being downsized into a cottage built just for me. On Monday, I spent the morning on the computer, the silver glow of the screen illuminating my face as I scrolled through rental listings in a small coastal town. The pictures were of sun-drenched balconies and windows that opened onto the sea. It was the world from Michael's old brochure, made tangible and real. That afternoon, I sat on the porch, a place where I used to wait for visitors, and felt no anticipation at all. I was simply there, feeling the warmth of the sun on my skin, watching a bee move methodically from one rose to another. I was no longer a gatekeeper. I was just a woman enjoying her garden. I thought of Leo, not with the sharp sting of betrayal anymore, but with a kind of distant, sorrowful clarity. I realized I wasn't mourning the man who had laughed at my expense in the hallway. I was mourning the memory of a little boy who held my hand in this very garden, who believed his mother was the strongest person in the world. I was grieving for the idea of a son I thought I had, and in that grief, there was a final, quiet release. I had packed his history into a box. Now I was packing away the idealized version of him that lived only in my heart. It was on Thursday, while I was pruning the last of the deadwood from the climbing roses, that the phone rang. The sound was jarring in the peaceful afternoon air. It was a number I didn't recognize. I hesitated, then wiped my earthy hands on my apron and answered, my voice a neutral. Hello? Grandma, it's Alex. Leo and Claire's son, my grandson. His voice was thin and uncertain, a boy's voice still finding its footing in a man's register. I was silent for a moment, my mind instantly on guard. Alex, I said, my tone calm but not warm. I just wanted to call, he stammered. Dad told me my key didn't work and that you weren't answering. I'm sorry. The apology hung in the air, vague and flimsy. It was a net cast out of guilt, hoping to catch something. My training as a nurse, the part of me that seeks diagnosis before treatment, took over. I would not comfort him. I would not rush to absolve him. I would simply ask for the truth. What exactly are you sorry for, Alex? The silence on the other end of the line was long and heavy. I could hear his shallow breathing. I imagined him in his dorm room, surrounded by books and the casual mess of a young man's life, forced for the first time to examine a piece of wreckage he had helped create. For that Sunday, he finally said, his voice barely a whisper. When my mom said that thing about you walking slowly, I heard my dad laugh, and I smiled. I didn't say anything. I just smiled. I'm sorry for that. It was a small confession, but it was specific. It was honest. It was a crack in the wall of their unified contempt. I see, I said, my voice softening just a fraction. Thank you for telling me. I did not say, it's okay. It wasn't, but his honesty deserved acknowledgement. After another moment of him struggling for words, I made a decision. I'll be home tomorrow afternoon, Alex. If you'd like to talk, you can come by at 3, but you must come alone. He arrived precisely at 3, his car pulling up quietly. When I opened the door, he stood there looking awkward and young, clutching a small bouquet of daisies from a supermarket. He looked around the living room, at the packed boxes and empty spaces on the walls. His eyes were wide with the tangible evidence of what they had broken. Wow, he whispered. You're really leaving. I'm moving forward, I corrected gently. I took the flowers and put them in a simple glass of water on the kitchen counter. I made us tea, and we sat at the old oak table, the silence between us filled only by the ticking of the clock. It was not a warm, familial gathering. It was a diplomatic meeting on the ruins of a former relationship. He finally looked at me, his expression earnest. I don't understand why I did it, he said. It wasn't funny. It was cruel. But when they both laughed, I just went along. I guess I was just copying them. I looked at my grandson, at his genuine confusion and shame. I saw not a villain, but a young man caught in the gravitational pull of his parents' casual cruelty. "You weren't just copying them, Alex," I said softly, my voice not accusatory, but diagnostic. "You just wanted to belong. When you're young, belonging to the stronger side feels like the safest place to be." He looked down at his hands, then nodded slowly, the truth of it settling in. We sat for a while longer, and he told me about his classes, and I told him about the town by the sea. It was a simple, careful conversation, like two people learning a new language together. As he was getting ready to leave, he paused at the door. "Grandma, can I still see you when you move?" It was the crucial question. He was asking if the door was closed forever. "Yes," I said, "you can, but not for Sunday dinners or holiday gifts. Our visits have to be different now. You can come for an honest conversation. You can come for a cup of tea. You can come to tell me the truth. That is the new price of admission." He nodded, understanding. I went to the kitchen, wrapped 3 of the simple butter cookies I had baked that morning in a napkin, and handed them to him. It wasn't a feast. It was a ration for a long journey back to trust. He took them, his fingers brushing mine, and for the first time, he gave me a real, unforced smile. After he left, I stood by the window and watched his car disappear down the street. The rain had stopped, and the late afternoon sun was breaking through the clouds, making the wet leaves on the trees glitter. Perhaps some doors aren't meant to be slammed shut forever, just quietly locked from the inside, leaving a window ajar for the ones who learn to come alone and knock gently. The final steps toward a new life are not taken with a leap, but with the same methodical pace I had now claimed as my own. On Tuesday morning, I prepared for my meeting with the real estate agent as a surgeon prepares for an operation. I chose my outfit with care. Simple navy trousers, a crisp white blouse, and a soft gray cardigan. It was the attire of a woman who is serious, solvent, and not to be trifled with. I did not wear my old orthopedic shoes, nor the new running shoes. I wore a pair of smart, comfortable loafers footwear for a woman who is walking, at her own pace, into her new future. The drive to the coastal town was quiet. I listened not to the radio, but to the hum of the engine, a steady sound carrying me away from the life that was and toward the life that would be. The apartment was on the 2nd floor of a small, well-kept building that smelled of sea salt and beeswax. The agent, a kind woman named Mrs. Peterson, unlocked the door and stepped aside. I walked in, and the first thing that struck me was the light. It poured in through a large glass door that led to a small balcony, flooding the main room and making the pale wooden floors gleam. It was the antithesis of the shadowed rooms of my old house, heavy with the weight of accumulated history and unspoken resentments. I walked to the balcony and stepped outside. The air was cool and clean, carrying the cry of gulls and the faint, rhythmic sigh of the waves. This was not the silence of an empty house. It was the sound of life, constant and enduring, Mrs. Peterson began to point out the features, the modern kitchen, the ample closet space, but I was barely listening. I already knew. "I'll take it," I said, my voice clear and certain. Back in her quiet office, which smelled of leather and fresh coffee, I signed the lease agreement without a tremor in my hand. As she stamped the documents, I looked out her window at the blue slice of the ocean visible between the buildings. My first act as a resident of my new life was to make a promise to myself. I would learn the names of the constellations visible from my balcony. It was a piece of knowledge that would be entirely my own. The emotional goodbyes were harder. That afternoon, as I was carefully wrapping my husband's collection of poetry in soft cloth, a car pulled into the driveway. It was Leo, alone. He didn't try the lock this time. He came to the front door and knocked, a hesitant, uncertain sound. I was in the living room, surrounded by boxes, and I did not move to open it. "Mom?" His voice came through the wood, strained. "Mom, please, we need to talk." "This is insane. You can't just dismantle our family." I stood and walked to the door, resting my hand on its cool, solid surface. "The family was dismantled a long time ago, Leo," I said, my voice calm and even. "I'm just packing up the pieces that belong to me." "That's not fair," he protested, his voice rising in frustration. "We love you. I love you. It was just a stupid joke. You're throwing everything away over one stupid joke." "It wasn't the joke, Leo. It was your laughter," I replied, the words precise and clinical. "And it wasn't just once. It was the final confirmation of a long-term diagnosis, a disregard for my personhood. You also seem to have forgotten the $65,000 you never repaid." "That wasn't a joke." A heavy silence fell. He had no answer for that. "Claire is a mess," he tried, changing tactics. "The boys are confused. You're hurting everyone. I am no longer responsible for Claire's emotional state," I said simply. "And Alex knows how to find me if he is confused. The only person I am hurting is the version of myself who was willing to be a servant in her own life, and I am doing it to save her." I heard him sigh, a sound of utter defeat. He leaned against the door, and I could almost feel the weight of him. He stayed there for another minute before his footsteps finally retreated. When I heard his car drive away, the dam I had so carefully constructed inside me finally broke. It wasn't a storm of rage, but a quiet, steady rain of grief. I sank into the old armchair and cried for a full 7 minutes. I wept for the little boy who loved me unconditionally. I wept for the man he never became. I wept for the years I had spent watering a garden that would never bloom, and when the tears stopped, I felt a profound emptiness, but it was a clean, hollow space ready to be filled. 2 days later, my new support system sat around my kitchen table. Helen, a retired librarian with a wicked sense of humor, and Sarah, a former teacher whose calm presence was a balm, had come over with sandwiches and a flask of hot tea. They didn't ask probing questions. They saw the boxes and understood. We talked about Helen's battle with a stubborn patch of crabgrass and Sarah's joy over her grandson learning to ride a bicycle. It was a conversation woven from the threads of ordinary life, a reminder that the world continues, full of small struggles and smaller victories. "Well," I said, pouring more tea into their cups, "it's official. I've signed a lease on a small apartment in Seabrook. I'll be moving at the end of the month." Helen placed her hand over mine. "Martha, that's wonderful news," she said, her eyes shining. "A new chapter." "Do you need help packing?" Sarah asked immediately. "We can organize a team from the Aqua class. We'll have you sorted in a day." Their immediate, unconditional offer of support was so different from the transactional nature of my family's love that it almost made me want to cry again. But these were tears of gratitude. I smiled, a genuine, warm smile. "Thank you," I said. "That means the world to me." In that small kitchen, amidst the chaos of boxes, I was not a problem to be managed or an obstacle to be overcome. I was simply a friend, embarking on an adventure. The final confrontation came without warning. It was the following Saturday. I was in the garden, transplanting a small rose bush into a pot to take with me, when I heard a car door slam with unnecessary force. I looked up to see Claire marching up the driveway. She was dressed in sharp, expensive athletic wear, as if she were heading into a boardroom battle, not a suburban garden. She didn't knock. She walked straight through the open back gate and stood before me, her arms crossed. "So this is it?" she began, her voice dripping with scorn. You're really going to go through with this pathetic little drama? Running away to some sad apartment to die alone? I finished patting the soil around the base of the rosebush before I stood up, wiping my hands on my apron. I looked at her, truly looked at her, and felt nothing but a profound sense of distance. Hello, Claire. I am not running away. I am walking towards my life. And I have no intention of dying alone. Oh, please, she scoffed. You're punishing Leo, punishing your grandchildren because your feelings got hurt. After everything we've done for you, let me stop you there, I interrupted, my voice quiet but firm as steel. Let's be very clear about the finances of this family. I gave your husband $65,000 to save your home. I cared for his grandparents so you wouldn't have to. For 20 years, I have been a resource, not a relative. My service is now complete. I was using the language of law and medicine, the RPM triggers of my past life, and I could see each word land like a well-aimed dart. This isn't about money. It's about family, she insisted, her voice growing shrill. My legs may be slow, Claire, I said, using one of my own quiet insights, but my mind is quicker than your greed. This has always been about money. You aren't angry that I'm leaving. You are terrified because your financial safety net has just been revoked. What are you talking about? She spat, though a flicker of fear appeared in her eyes. I am talking, I said, reaching into my apron pocket, about the trust fund, the one Michael left for me, the one you and Leo were the sole beneficiaries of upon my death. I pulled out a folded piece of paper, a copy of the amendment from Mr. Gable's office, and held it out to her. As of last week, Leo has been removed. The new beneficiary is a charitable trust for the education of nurses. You see, I decided to invest in people who actually value care and service. She stared at the paper as if it were a snake. The color drained from her face, replaced by a mask of pure fury. All pretense of concern vanished, revealing the raw, ugly truth beneath. She looked at me, her eyes narrowed. You will regret this. You will be a lonely old woman, and no one will care. I looked back at her, at this angry, frightened woman, and I felt a final surge of calm, quiet power. I would rather drink my morning coffee alone, in peace, and with my dignity intact, than sit at 1,000 family dinners filled with disrespect. I am not lonely, Claire. I am free. She snatched the paper, crumpled it in her fist, turned, and stormed away without another word. I watched her go, a rigid, defeated figure. I listened until the sound of her car faded into nothing. The door closed behind her with a soft click, not a slam. I did not feel triumph, nor did I feel sorrow. I felt only silence, but this was a new kind of silence. It was not the silence of absence or of being ignored. It was the vast, peaceful, and absolute silence of sovereignty. The final threads of my old life were snipped not with a dramatic flourish, but with the quiet, satisfying click of officialdom. The call came from Mr. Gable on a Wednesday morning, his voice as calm and orderly as his wood-paneled office. Martha, he said, and I could hear the faint smile in his tone. I just wanted to inform you that the sale of the house has officially closed. The funds have been transferred to your accounts. All documents have been filed and finalized. He paused, and then added, with a warmth that went beyond professional duty, you are now the sole author of every decision in every inch of your life. Congratulations. The words were not emotional, but they landed with the force of a verdict, a final, liberating judgment. I thanked him, my own voice steady. After hanging up, I performed my last practical act of severance. I drove to the old post office, walked to the bank of metal boxes, and handed the clerk the keys to the P.O. box that had served our family for 50 years. As I walked out into the sunshine, I felt the lightness not just of empty pockets, but of an unburdened spirit. The last address that tied me to them was officially gone. That afternoon, Alex came by for the second time. The atmosphere in the old house was completely different. It was a space in transition, filled with the clean, papery smell of cardboard boxes and the echoes of a life already packed away. We didn't sit formally at the table. Instead, we sat on the floor in the living room, leaning against stacks of books, and shared the last of the butter cookies from a simple tin. He looked around at the skeletal room, his expression a mixture of awe and sadness. "Dad called me," he said quietly, not looking at me. "He sounds lost. He says you've erased them." I took a slow sip of my tea before answering. "Your father isn't mourning me, Alex. He's mourning the loss of a version of me that existed to serve him. He is mourning the loss of his comfort, his convenience, and his financial security. It's a valid grief, I suppose, but it has very little to do with love." He was silent for a long moment, processing this. Then he reached into his backpack and pulled out a small, clumsily wrapped object. I made this for you, for your new place." He handed it to me. I unwrapped the tissue paper to reveal a small, beautifully carved wooden bird. It was a shorebird, a sandpiper perhaps, its form simple and elegant, its head tilted as if listening to the ocean. The wood was smooth and warm in my hand. It was exquisitely rendered, a work of patient, careful hands. "Alex, this is beautiful," I whispered, genuinely moved. "It looks so strong and free." He finally looked at me, a shy smile on his face. "I thought of you," he said. "The way you're walking your own path now. Sandpipers, they know where they're going." I looked from the bird to my grandson's earnest face, and I saw the first true healthy thing to grow from the ashes of my old life. "I will put this in a place of honor in my new home," I promised him. "Thank you." The day of the move arrived not with a storm, but with the pearly gray light of dawn. I woke early and walked through the empty house one last time. The rooms, stripped of their furniture, held the ghosts of half a century. I ran my hand along the doorframe where I had marked Leo's height, not with pain, but with a tender farewell to the boy he had been. I stood in the center of the kitchen and remembered the thousands of meals prepared with love, and I felt a surge of gratitude for the strength this house had given me. It had been a good shelter. It had done its job. On the clean kitchen counter, I left the single, new front door key. Next to it, I placed a simple, handwritten note. It was not addressed to anyone. It just said, "Thank you for the shelter. May you find peace here." Then I walked out, closed the door behind me, and did not look back. My arrival at the new apartment was the perfect counterpoint. The air smelled of fresh paint and the salty sea breeze that drifted through the open balcony door. The building manager, the same kind, Mrs. Peterson, met me with a smile and a small potted geranium. "A little something to welcome you home," she said. Her simple kindness felt more genuine than years of obligatory family gatherings. The movers were efficient and respectful, placing the few boxes I had brought in the designated rooms. After they left, I stood alone in the bright, sunlit space. The silence was not the hollow echo of an empty past, but the quiet hum of a waiting future. I decided to unpack just 3 things. First, the electric kettle, placing it on the new counter, a promise of simple, daily comfort. Second, I unwrapped Alex's wooden bird and set it on the windowsill overlooking the sea, a sentinel of my new beginning. The last item I took from a box labeled Michael Keep was his favorite book of poetry. I placed it on the small table that would become my reading nook. Comfort, connection, and strength. The cornerstones of my new life were now in place. My new routine was born of choice, not duty. I rose with the sun, not with the needs of others. My first week, while unpacking Michael's books, a yellowed envelope fell out from between the pages of one. It was a letter he had written me on our 10th anniversary, one I had forgotten. His familiar script filled the page. "My dearest Martha," it read, "they all see your quietness and mistake it for passivity. They don't see the steel beneath it. You are the most methodical, resilient soul I have ever known. You don't bend, you don't break, you simply endure, and then you choose your own path. Never forget that strength." Reading his words felt like a blessing from the past, a final validation from the one person who had truly seen me. The following morning, I christened my new kitchen. I did not bake a complicated cake. I baked a simple loaf of bread. I kneaded the dough with my own hands, feeling its life and elasticity, a meditation in flour and water. The smell of it baking filled my small apartment, a scent not of obligation but of self-nourishment. That Saturday, Alex visited again. This time, he brought a toolbox. "The bookshelf you ordered arrived," he announced. "I've figured you could use a hand." We spent the afternoon working together, a comfortable silence broken by the simple language of assembly. "Can you pass me that screw? Hold this steady for a moment." It was easy. It was real. We ate thick slices of my homemade bread with butter and jam, sitting on the floor amidst the half-built shelf. "So?" he said, looking around the bright room at the sea beyond the balcony. "Is this it? Peace?" I considered his question, the taste of the warm bread still on my tongue. "Not all of it," I said, my voice full of a gentle, earned wisdom. "The world is too large and life is too long for all of it. But this is a piece of it, a very important piece, and it is mine." I didn't miss the big house. I didn't miss Leo's silences or Claire's cutting remarks. I didn't miss the old version of me, the one who would stand by a window and whisper to herself, "Maybe next time they will see you," because now I saw myself. And I no longer needed anyone's permission to exist. A house is not just wood and stone. It is a vessel. For decades, my house had been a vessel for the lives of others, for the echoes of a husband's laughter, the pencil marks of a growing son, the heavy silence of unspoken expectations. It held their histories, their needs, their demands. To sell it was not a financial transaction. It was the act of emptying a container that was no longer mine to carry. The final call from Miss Gable, confirming the sale and the subsequent transfer of the proceeds, was merely the formal closing of a door I had already walked through. My reaction was not one of excitement or relief, but of profound, quiet completion. This was not the end of a chapter. It was the closing of an entire volume. The next day, I walked into the downtown office of the Seabrook Women's Shelter. It was a humble place, clean and bright, smelling of coffee and a faint, hopeful scent of disinfectant. The director, a woman with tired but kind eyes, greeted me. We sat in her small office, and I placed an envelope on the desk between us. It contained the certified check from the liquidation of the asset, the net proceeds from the sale of my former life. She looked at the amount on the check, and her eyes widened in disbelief. "Mrs. Daniels, I don't know what to say. This is transformative." "It's a foundation," I said. my voice steady. Not for a building, but for the women themselves. I thought for a moment, seeing a flash of my old doctor. Comfort shoes, the symbol of my long, weary journey. This is for the women who have to walk a long way on tired feet, and for the nurses who will help them learn to stand up again. I felt a phantom ache in my own legs, an echo of a past life, but it was not painful. It was a memory of strength. As I left her office, I felt no pang of loss for the house, for the garden, for the material shell of my history. I had cried all the tears I needed to cry. This wasn't grief. It was purpose. My new apartment had truly become a sanctuary, not just for me, but for Alex as well. He began visiting weekly, his presence a quiet, comforting rhythm in my new life. One afternoon, he arrived with a cardboard box under his arm, looking almost conspiratorial. "Can I keep this here?" he asked, his voice low. "It's my journal and my sketchbook. My mom, she found my last one. She read it. She said it was morbid and ungrateful." He didn't have to explain further. I understood the violation of having one's private, inner world invaded and judged. I took the box from him. "Of course," I said, leading him to the small closet in the spare room. "This will be its home. It will be safe here." He placed the box on the shelf, a visible wave of relief washing over him. As we sat drinking tea later, he asked the question that was clearly weighing on him. "Do you think they can ever change?" I looked out at the sea, at the endless, patient waves. "That's the wrong question, my dear," I said softly, the wisdom feeling old and heavy, but not burdensome. "People change all the time, in small ways. The harder question is whether they can ever stop pretending. Your father pretends to be a victim. Your mother pretends to be a powerful judge. To change, they would have to give up the roles they have spent a lifetime building. It is a very, very difficult thing to stand on an empty stage and be only yourself." A week later, a letter arrived. The handwriting on the envelope was Leo's. It was the first direct communication from him since our final confrontation at the door. I opened it, not with trepidation, but with a calm, clinical curiosity. The letter was short, the words clumsy and stained with what seemed like genuine confusion. "Mom," it read, "I walk through the house and it's empty. Claire is selling everything. It doesn't feel like our home anymore. It feels like a museum of a family I thought we were. I don't know who we are without you there to hold it all together. I don't recognize myself." I read the letter twice. I saw the pain in it. I saw the dawning, terrifying awareness of the consequences, but I did not feel the old pull of responsibility. It was not my job to help him recognize himself. My work was done. I folded the letter neatly and placed it in the back of my desk drawer, alongside the old lease and other archived papers. I was not angry. I was not triumphant. I was simply finished. It was his story to write now. My 78th birthday arrived on a Tuesday. I woke to the sound of seagulls and the smell of the ocean. There was no dread, no manufactured anticipation of forced family cheer. I made myself coffee and the buttermilk pancakes Michael had loved, eating them slowly by the open balcony door, watching the morning light dance on the water. It was a celebration of one, quiet, simple, and entirely my own. At noon, Alex arrived. He didn't bring a store-bought gift, but a small, framed watercolor he had painted himself. It was a picture of the little wooden sandpiper he had carved for me, standing at the edge of the water, looking out at a vast, blue horizon. Underneath, he had written, "For the one who taught me how to walk my own way." "It's beautiful, Alex," I told him, my voice thick with emotion. We spent the afternoon talking about his plans for college, his desire to study architecture, to build things that were both beautiful and strong. As he was leaving, he hugged me and said something that struck me more than any compliment I had ever received. "You seem different, Grandma. Taller, somehow. You look like a person who doesn't flinch anymore." In the evenings that followed, my new life settled into a beautiful, quiet rhythm. The orchid on my windowsill, a plant I'd brought from the old house, brown-leafed and near death, had miraculously produced a single, perfect white bloom, a testament to the power of new light. Helen and Sarah would come for tea, our conversations a gentle stream of shared stories and easy laughter, the sound of true companionship. One evening, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Leo. "Happy birthday, Mom." I read the words, felt a flicker of the old sadness, and then I put the phone down and turned my attention back to the book in my lap. I didn't answer. Not out of anger, but out of peace. The conversation was over. That night, before I slept, I opened my own journal to a fresh page. The question that had haunted me for so long, the memory of their laughter at my slow pace, finally had its answer. They laughed because I walked slowly. They thought my slowness was a sign of decay, a weakness to be mocked. They never understood. I walk slowly now to feel the solid ground beneath my feet. I walk slowly to choose my words with intention, not obligation. I walk slowly so that I have time to see who is walking beside me. I walk slowly because the table I now set, whether for one or for many, is a place of peace, not performance. And it is a table where everyone, starting with me, has a seat of honor.